Traditional fairy tales have shaped our understanding of good and evil for centuries. But what happens when we discover those stories were crafted by the winners, leaving the so-called villains voiceless?
Today we're exploring a fascinating retelling that turns the Snow White narrative completely inside out.
What's the story behind that?
Well, it turns out this Czech artist, TomTom'STUDIO, lost everything in a crypto fraud. But instead of giving up, he transformed that rock-bottom moment into this incredible creative studio that's tackling all these taboo subjects nobody wants to talk about.
That's such an interesting angle, looking at how this story reframes the evil queen as Morgana, a child born with extraordinary gifts who faces fear and prejudice from the very beginning.
You know what really strikes me about the author's approach? The way they use that dramatic storm during Morgana's birth to symbolize how her very existence threatens the established order.
You mean like those uncomfortable topics that make people suddenly need to check their phones at dinner parties?
Exactly. We're talking mental health, addiction, sexual identity. But here's what makes it fascinating. He's created this whole new approach called multimodal storytelling, where he turns these difficult experiences into these immersive artistic experiences.
That's such an interesting perspective on narrative control. The way this retelling humanizes Morgana reminds me of how Gregory Maguire transformed our view of the Wicked Witch in Wicked.
Well, what's particularly fascinating is how the author weaves in these contemporary themes of otherness and authenticity. You know, the story opens with Morgana's birth during this massive storm talk about symbolism and immediately sets up this prophecy about her having the potential for both creation and destruction.
The pressure of that kind of prophecy on a child must be enormous. How does the author handle that psychological weight?
That's exactly what makes this story so compelling. Instead of just giving us the typical evil queen narrative, we see this young girl struggling with powers she never asked for, finding refuge in the castle gardens with this wise woman, Serafina. It's like imagine being told you're dangerous before you've even had the chance to figure out who you are.
So how does he actually pull that off without it feeling, exploitative?
Well, that's where his project The Shadow's Crown comes in. It's this Gothic reimagining of Snow White that he created as a way to process his own journey. But instead of just telling the story, he's created this whole experience that actually transforms as people engage with it.
Oh, wow. So it's like breaking down that wall between audience and art?
Right? And get this.
The parallel with Bradley's work is fascinating. Both authors are challenging traditional power structures through a feminine lens.
And speaking of power structures, let's talk about how the author weaves in these incredibly relevant themes about institutional control. Father Malakar's character represents this systemic attempt to suppress what's different. It's like watching a medieval version of modern gatekeeping.
The way Morgana navigates these power dynamics reminds me of other recent fantasy works like Naomi Novik's Uprooted. How do you think this book fits into the current trend of subversive fairy tale retellings?
The author actually drew inspiration from organizations like MAPS and their work with psychedelics to access deeper truths. It adds this whole other layer to Morgana's journey of self-discovery.
Well, that certainly explains the depth of the internal landscapes we see in the story. The way Morgana processes her mother's death and that devastating birthday scene, it's almost like a psychological case study in trauma and resilience.
Speaking of that birthday scene, it's really a turning point. Here's this young girl probably excited about her special day, and instead she experiences this public humiliation that leads to her being confined. It's like watching someone's worst fears about themselves being confirmed in front of everyone they love.
Well, what sets this apart is how deeply it delves into psychological territory. The way the author structures Morgana's journey, from feared child to powerful queen, mirrors Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. But with this brilliant twist where the traditional villain becomes the protagonist.
The transformation of her character really challenges our assumptions about power and morality.
That's really taking the whole art imitating life thing to a new level, isn't it?
And here's what I find really powerful. He has this quote where he says, "Sometimes life is heavy, and the magic happens when we stop pretending everything is perfect and start getting real about our shadows." Like, he's not trying to make these topics more palatable. He's leaning into the discomfort.
You know what that reminds me of? Those breakthrough moments in therapy where you finally stop trying to pretty everything up and just get real.
The author's background in psychology really comes through in these intimate character moments.
The relationship between the sisters becomes this powerful lens for examining how society handles difference in power.
You know what really elevates this beyond typical fantasy? The way it incorporates elements of historical witch persecutions. The author's clearly done their research on how societies have historically treated powerful women.
That historical context gives such weight to Morgana's struggle with her identity.
And 20 years later, when we find her choosing redemption over revenge that's not just character development, that's a radical reimagining of power itself. It's like what Ursula K. Le Guin did with A Wizard of Earthsea, showing that true power lies in understanding rather than dominance.
The author seems to be suggesting that real strength comes from integration rather than conquest.
Looking at the broader implications, this book really challenges how we think about narrative perspective in general. It's not just about rehabilitating a villain, it's about questioning who gets to tell the story and why.
That's precisely what makes this story so relevant today. It's asking us to examine our own assumptions about power, difference, and truth.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating is that there's clearly an audience for it. He's proving that when you give voice to the experiences people usually hide, you create this powerful connection that transcends cultural boundaries.
So, what do you think this means for the future of storytelling?
As he puts it, the most stigmatized experiences often hold the deepest wisdom.
In the end, this book isn't just adding to the current trend of fairy tale retellings. It's creating something entirely new. It's showing us that the most important stories might be the ones we've been taught to fear.
The introduction of Snow White adds another complex layer to it all. Instead of the typical rivalry, we see this protective bond that's ultimately strained by external forces.
Right, and that's where Father Malachar comes in. He's this brilliant example of how real villainy often works through manipulation and fear rather than outright evil. The way he offers Morgana that choice, serve him or face destruction, it's actually scarier than any traditional villain because it's so realistic.
Well, here's what makes it even more interesting. He's actually building this whole community around these ideas. He has this saying, normal stories are for normal people, and honestly, where's the fun in that? It's like he's creating this safe space for unsafe conversations.
That's really flipping the script on what we consider marketable art, isn't it? What do you think this means for the future of storytelling?
You know, I think he's showing us that there's this huge untapped potential in addressing these difficult topics head on. Like, imagine if instead of avoiding these conversations, we had more artists creating spaces where we could actually process them together.
That's really changing the whole conversation about what art is supposed to do, isn't it?